Welcome to my personal introduction. Let's get started. I've set up my introduction to follow a fairy tale theme, and I've aligned it with the Pixar movie Ratatouille, so I hope you find it entertaining as well as enlightening. This presentation is broken up into 5 acts about my life, first personal, then professional, my area of focus integrated with my views, concerns, and insights of tech and mental health, some summaries of articles, and a few final thoughts, and not just about rats. Every fairy tale should start going way back in time to the magic of the early days, and my story is no exception. Once upon a time, 2 people met and fell in love. 1. My mother grew up in the mountains north of Montreal, born to a 16-year-old in abject poverty. Eventually, 6 kids and their mom shared that 2-bedroom house where food was scarce. They grew vegetables, they milked their goat, and snared rabbits for food. The father would come home on weekends to a house full of kids. He was very abusive. In the village, there was a small school where primary kids were in one room and junior kids were in the other. My grandmother's job entailed bringing all of her children to the school early so she could light the fire in the wood stove to heat the building. Mother struggled with school, failing grades 1 and 6. She ran away to Montreal when she was 16. The other, my dad, fared better. He went through school in Verdun, finished grade 11, the last year of secondary in Quebec, and became a mold maker. They married and lived with my paternal grandparents because they didn't make enough to be able to buy a place of their own. Their technology included analog wristwatches, wall clocks, electrical stoves and irons, and their party line telephone. Like Remy the rat, every day they dreamed of a better life. Because of that, my parents worked hard until one day they'd saved enough money and could finally afford the down payment on a little post-war bungalow. My dad studied through his life and became a draftsman and later a petrochemical engineer. I'm not sure why we moved every 4 or 5 years when I was a kid, except my mother's growing mental health issues started in earnest around that time. She couldn't cope with 4 kids and running the household. Among other things, she was overwhelmed by the FLQ crisis when Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau enacted the War Measures Act, which sent tanks and army vehicles rolling by our house on the main street. After that, we moved to Ontario. Like the rats in Ratatouille, we needed to move on. Remy the rat got to move to Paris. Because of that, at Ajax High, I discovered calculators, electric typewriters, and room-sized computers. Through the guidance department, I also learned about scholarships. I was assigned a counselor in grade 11 who told me that if I could get my marks up, I could go to college. My parents didn't think post-secondary was necessary, believing I should just get a job. I was able to get a full scholarship to Seneca College and took early childhood education. Like Remy, I had to find ways to get where I needed to be and to learn what I needed to learn. I was lucky to have help from a lot of people who gave me the courage and the opportunities to go to school and work. Because of that, by the 1980s, I was working in daycare and later in an office, learning to use early personal computers that were becoming ubiquitous at work. I also enrolled in the fashion design program at Toronto Metropolitan University. There, I was able to learn about the Lectra system that could be used to create patterns rather than having to draw them by hand, and the Gerber mover, which used a track system to move fabric pieces through the garment construction process. It was fascinating. I was invited to participate in an educational trip to Hong Kong Polytechnical University and Bunka University in Japan to see how they use laser scanners to take perfect measurements of live bodies to make made-to-measure clothing. It was an amazing time in the development of technology. Like Remy, I had to learn how things worked and try new things. Because of that, I found I loved learning, helping, and reteaching others in my courses who didn't pick up concepts as quickly as I did. A professor told me I should be a teacher because I was able to reach kids with whom he didn't connect. Finally, under his mentorship, I did become a teacher at the age of 33. I spent almost a decade teaching visual arts, family studies, and cooperative education before spending almost 20 years in elementary, working in libraries, special education, and focusing on primary students. Throughout my career, I found that many children and youth suffer from anxiety and self-doubt, as well as depression. They don't have the tools to ensure that they'll feel confident and competent. I lost my brother in the 1980s, and while I was at Mowat Collegiate, several students there also lost their lives to suicide. Others in their friend group were parasuicides. I started to teach them my own strategies to promote inner strength and coping skills. Like Remy, and of course Linguini, growth and understanding represents the learning process which is at the core of education and technology integration. I had to find a way to fix problems and make it work for others. As a teacher, I was fortunate to meet and marry Peter Marsh, the art director at Wexford Collegiate School for the Arts and the past president of the Canadian Society of Painters and Watercolor. He encouraged me to work on my own and to develop my own style, which I've based on fairy tales and miniatures. Together, we have a dynamic blended family of 4 adult children, 4 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. I am grateful for his endless support. I retired from teaching in 2019, just before the pandemic, and turned to new activities. Peter and I are the founding directors of the Existential Art Gallery of Scarborough, working towards a world-class gallery in the East End of Toronto, which needs good jobs and a place to present and explore our multicultural stories. Because of the pandemic, we moved online. I also became the secretary and sit on the board of the Toronto Watercolor Society, which was floundering during the COVID lockdowns. They were struggling to find a way to continue when most of the members were older. Many were lonely. They were motivated to move online when I offered to train and support them using Zoom for executive meetings, board meetings, and workshops. Even the Ratatouille kitchen worked better as a team. My journey continues as I sustain my interest in learning and education. Little Henry has benefited from having 3 educators work with him and going to Nana School during the pandemic. Ever since then, I've become increasingly concerned with children and youth when it comes to parenting, teaching, and technology during and after the lockdowns. Of course, during that time, both kids and parents struggled with education taking place at home. Both had anxiety caused by the steep learning curve, knowing that these were not optimal circumstances. They were doing what was needed through the lens of tech, but that tech stopped kids from developing social skills, and often parents were unable to provide an adequately supportive environment. One of my kids, some of you may know Rox Hayward, Henry's papa, suggested we take a graduate diploma in education and digital technology together. It reawakened my love of learning, and together we decided to pursue a Master of Education, which developed into an interest in writing a thesis. So we're in the process of transferring to the MA program. In the kitchen of Ratatouille, life is a joint effort. At OTU, I was lucky to be in a class with Dr. Petrarca, who suggested I watch a presentation from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development after hearing about my way of teaching children to cope with anxiety. And it was there that I found out about Costa and Calic's habits of mind and how it aligned with my own thinking. As a brief summary of the webinar entitled How to Turn Schools into Hubs of Social and Emotional Learning, first broadcast live on March 30th, 2023, the speakers discussed the need for social and emotional skills. In order to have youth grow to be well and successful in school, they need to develop skills included in the habits of mind. Pedro Canha, Director General for Education in Portugal, spoke about reducing the amount of curriculum required in each area of learning by 25%. He did this because he was focused on developing well-rounded students emotionally prepared to live in a digital world of information. The biggest takeaway for me was that as students learn these skills, they develop the tools they need for success. They're able to cope with daily problems, and they know how to seek help when they're overwhelmed. By the end of the webinar, I was convinced to learn more about the Institute for the Habits of Mind. Since then, I've begun classes to become an accredited teacher using the habits. You may wonder why I choose Ratatouille as the story for this presentation. It's because Remy has critical thinking and problem-solving skills that showcase how applying these habits of mind can help overcome challenges and achieve success. I recently read an article in Forbes that said only 12% of students feel like they really belong on their campuses, and 44% reported feelings of depression. Yellow Dig, a company that creates virtual learning communities, is working to create supportive spaces to ensure students feel like they fit in. Through a virtual platform, they offer learning spaces and tailored support services 24/7. There are currently over 500,000 students participating on their platform. Of those, 77% stated that Yellow Dig increased their sense of belonging, and 60% reported visiting the site more than 3 to 5 times a week. Yellow Dig uses an inquiry-based, peer-driven, gameful approach to promote deeper learning. This reduced faculty effort, which is important at a time when students have higher needs. Yellow Dig's platform lists its program as facilitating conversations, mentoring, and peer learning with real-world examples, simulations, and case studies. Day or night, students can find others with similar interests with whom they can connect and mutually support. This increases the likelihood that students will finish their programs. Remy's determination to pursue his dreams against all odds represents the habits of persistence and flexibility, both vital to the fields of education and tech. The increased burden of anxiety and the depression caused by poor social skills developed during the pandemic detrimentally impact learning. Mitigating risks to mental health can be achieved through early interventions both at school and at home. The number of youth with social, mental, and emotional issues has created a vacuum of professionals with the knowledge and skills to address these needs, and they come at a cost that will not be available within the education system. My research will answer the question, can a certified individual practitioner trained to teach Costa and Calic's habits of mind reduce self-reported levels of anxiety in 4 female secondary students? This is a significant question because the cost of educating MED students in these techniques is small in relation to the resulting capacity building of their future classes. The scalability of this study has the potential to substantially improve the mental health and wellness in Ontario youth over time. The multiplier effect of teaching future parents the disposition learned through the habits of mind could be far-reaching. Ratatouille emphasizes creativity and innovation, which aligns to the innovation in educational tech to enhance the learning experience. I'm grateful that you stayed to listen to my story. If you want to hear more, check me out at wendyfmarsh.com. Thanks.